Hello and welcome back to Thematic Intelligence. At Global Data's Thematic Intelligence, we track over 100 tech, industry, ESG, and macro themes impacting all major sectors. I'm Carolina Pinto, and today I would like to welcome back Steve Blitz, Chief U.S. Economist at TS Lombard. Steve, welcome back. How are you?
I am fine. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for coming back. Today we have quite a big topic. So at the turn of the year, I had Christopher Granville on the podcast, and we spoke about this big 2024 year of democratic elections. And today I kind of wanted to hone in on the most anticipated ones, the US elections. We are 6 months out, and as far as we can tell, this may change, but we will have two quite unpopular characters, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, that will go up against each other in November. Now, when I met you in London in April, you had quite very interesting points about how divisive elections can impact the economy. From your view, what are the implications of the U.S. elections on the U.S. economy, and do these implications change depending on who wins?
Yeah, I think they do change. In one important way, it does not change. And in another important way, it does. So, how it doesn't change is that both Biden and Trump are running what we could call a nationalistic economic policy, right? They are both focused on rebuilding the middle income, mid-skill job that was lost through trade over the last 30, 40 years. And to rebuild that income and to raise real growth as a result. So both of them are going to put in tax and trade policies that favor domestic production over sourcing goods and capital from the rest of the world. And so that has a profound implication. However, how they get there, right? In some ways it's similar, and in some ways it's different. Trump is much more old-fashioned, shall we say, in terms of favoring carbon over green, drilling oil on national parklands and giving out those leases. He is not in favor of subsidies for batteries and electric cars and windmills, and is in favor of digging coal to fuel electric plants. They both want to expand and improve the electric grid in the U.S. and all that. So again, there's the intersection and where they are is similar in terms of their aim, but how they get there is very different.
But the Inflation Reduction Act that Biden passed in 2022 has, in some ways, at least the projects that are planned are quite focused on Republican states. So would you agree that Trump, although he won't necessarily facilitate or initiate any green initiatives, he also won't necessarily cancel a lot of the ones that are creating jobs, especially, domestic jobs. Yeah, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. I mean, it's an old truth that the progressives push things, and then once it becomes a business, the right defends it. There's no real bigger example of that in history than back in the 70s to try and reduce U.S. dependence on foreign oil. They came up with ethanol, which is, fueled by corn. And most Republicans at the time were against that. Right. But most of the corn in the U.S., certainly the corn for ethanol, is grown in Iowa. Iowa is historically actually been what you would call now a purple state, but it does tend to lean more conservative. And of late, it has Republican representation. And any attempt to reduce or kill that ethanol subsidy would be absolutely pushed against by the Republican Party. So, yes, I think that, a lot of these battery plants, a lot of these electric car facilities are being built in red counties and red states. I would say Biden's frustration is that this is not turning into votes for him, at least not according to the polling.
Yes, I think you're completely right. And moving a bit on to the financial markets, what is your opinion? How does the U.S. election impact the financial markets?
Well, I think the biggest difference, and it's probably has less to do with Trump than just a Republican versus a Democrat in the White House, is that Republicans tend towards leaning less regulation of markets, which also means less taxes. I think
Hmm.
if you got a Biden reelection with a Democratic Senate and a Democratic House, which remember, that's the party controlling both houses of Congress, or each house of Congress, is also important in what can and cannot be done from a legislative standpoint. But I think there are a lot of plans for taxing incomes and wealth and capital gains rates and things like that that Biden would put in that would be very negative for the markets, right? Whereas, under Trump, he would probably want to see zero capital gains tax, right? So there is a big difference. And also it comes down into regulation and regulation of the crypto industry and things like that. So I would say, generally speaking, the Republicans always lean towards less regulation, the Democrats to more.
As you mentioned, there is also, alongside the presidential elections, there is also elections for the US Congress. And currently, there's predictions that we'll get a split Congress, meaning that one party will get majority over the House or the Senate, and the opposing party will get the majority in the other chamber. As you mentioned, there are some implications of whether we get a united or a divided government and whether that equates to whoever wins the presidential election. What are some of the other, both domestic and global implications of getting either a united or split government?
Well, it depends how it works, right? In terms of who gets control of what party. And I think, the early betting, or my actually early betting, would be that the House will go Democratic. Now, the House is a 2-year term, and so 100% of the House is reelected every 2 years, right? The Senate is a 6-year term, so only 1/3 of the Senate is reelected every 2 years. Now, the odds favor the Republicans taking the Senate by a few seats simply because of who's retiring and which states are electing a senator. But I'll tell you that it's not necessarily, it wouldn't actually shock me if somehow or another the Democrats managed to pull out a win in the Senate. Simply because I think the woman vote, especially on the abortion issue, has really crippled Republican initiatives and Republican candidates in some very conservative states. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, a woman who's running as a Democrat in a conservative state is a pretty conservative person themselves. Right. So, the Democrat from some liberal district in New York is not the same Democrat that's running in Louisville or, in Ohio or someplace like that. So the difference on policy is this, as far as the rest of the world is concerned. By law meaning the Constitution, tax and spending comes out of the House, right? And that's the role of the Senate is really in advice and consent. I mean, both parties have to pass legislation and sign things and all that. But what that means is that in terms of choosing judges, in terms of passing on cabinet appointees, on ambassadors, all those things just have to be approved by the Senate. So it would be a lot easier for Trump to get through the things that he wants to do and the judiciary he wants, and to do the global things, right, that he wants to do with a Republican Senate.
Mm-hmm.
And the stuff that he wants, and tariffs is also really in the Senate. What he wants to do in terms of the budget, in terms of lowering taxes, cutting spending, whatever combination he wants to put through in his budget, that really has to get approved by the House. It'll get approved by the Senate, but it has to get approved by the House first. And that's where having a Democratic versus a Republican majority matters, right? The markets tend to like divided government.
Yeah.
They like that check and balance because the markets feel that it constrains the party in the White House from going too far off the rails, right? And so oftentimes when presidents win their first term, and this would not be Trump's first term, but oftentimes presidents come in a first term and they usually get a House and the Senate with them. And then in the first midterm election, they lose one or both. People tend to like divided government. They just feel like it just holds everybody in place a bit better.
It slows down the pace of legislation and therefore less change, which is
less change,
stability.
Stability, less of a sort of a dictatorial, and I'll say that broadly, left and right. So Biden wins and he gets a Democratic House. People don't want to see these wealth taxes and all these other kinds of, people have a very negative view on that, so they're not going to want to see that happen because they think it'll be counterproductive to growth. Mm-hmm. So, but if you have a divided government, that he can't do that. It'll get shut down. So that's the kind of thing that people want to see.
So we've now talked about Joe. We've talked about Donald Trump. I don't know why I refer to him as Joe instead of Biden. But on first name terms.
Maybe you're an old friend. I don't know.
The report you did recently, the Election Watch Deep Dive, you discussed third-party presidential candidates. And for the first time in 3 decades, the third-party presidential contender, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is polling at double digits. What effect can this have on the election results, if any?
Well, I think it can have a big effect. I think nobody's really clear on which way. The general wisdom is that it would hurt Biden more than Trump because a lot of the disaffected Democrats, are going to go for Kennedy. I don't think, honestly, he kind of collects people from both ends. In a number of states, the margin of victory in 2020 and even in 2016 was less than 100,000 votes. In some cases, it was 15, 25, 35,000 votes out of millions cast. So you can imagine if somebody, forget that Kennedy, but if somebody polls 2, 5, 7% of the vote, as opposed to 0, it's going to change that difference. The argument has been made that when Perot ran in 92, because of how many votes he pulled, he cost George H.W. Bush, the first Bush, the election to Clinton. And then some will argue that Ralph Nader and his votes in 2000 cost Gore the election. But I think the problem I have with all of that is not, it's a static math argument, right? Because what you don't know, and I know you poll and you ask, but polls aren't 100% accurate. Yes. You may be pulling people to vote that would have otherwise not voted at all, right? So you don't know that they would necessarily change the balance between one party or the other. And also, I believe that you got to make your case. Part of the problem in the U.S. in doing this is that we're in a very polarized country. The way in which you win, right, is so you scare people. So the game becomes turnout because you can't there aren't enough people in the middle whose minds you can change. All right. So that's one of the reasons why the rhetoric is the way it is. I mean, it's everybody is, and I'm not trying to argue whether one side has truth in their scare tactics or not. I want to try to cut this down the middle here, but understand that a lot of the rhetoric on both sides is designed to scare you to vote, because if both sides are equally decided and there's only 10 people whose minds you can change, then you need a higher turnout. So like I said, I think the third party matters. I think in a close election, it'll certainly, looking backwards, because then you're looking at a static as opposed to dynamic result. It clearly is going to make a difference, because you'll say, well, if all these Biden, these took the Kennedy voters and 55% of them went for Biden, then Biden would have won. But who's to say that that 55% would have shown up in the first place? They may have just decided to stay home. We don't know that. So you got to make your case and scare people to show up.
I think that's the name of the game. It's been the name of the game for quite a few elections now. But
Yeah, and I'm personally exhausted by it.
well, thank God then I made you come on the podcast to talk more about it.
Always happy to talk to you about it. No
Uh,
problem there.
but thank you so much, Steve, for coming. Thank you for those insights. Thanks for listening. And from us at Thematic Intelligence, see you next time.